Just all really quiet.
Okay, just wanted to check that I didn't have a problem.
Yes, we're just all on mute.
Okay, very good.
All right, looks like we have a quorum, so let's get going. And 6:32, so that would be good. Okay, so since we do have a quorum at the moment, let us go ahead and approve the minutes from our last meeting. So if someone could unmute your lines and you can offer a motion to accept, and then second. And then we're going to have a show of hands.
I motion to accept the minutes.
I second.
All right, thank you. And you know what? Let's just everybody unmute and go for it. And just those in favor. That little hand thing is really, then it stays up. And okay, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're going to jump right into the stormwater language that David sent around Friday of last week. I think maybe I'll turn it over to Joe and let him talk about the issue and the language and your interaction with task force members. So Joe, you're on mute.
Okay, very good. Now I'm unmuted.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. It took me a while
All right.
to go from one document to the next. Yeah,
All
as you
right.
can see from what David has sent to everybody, we took to heart the direction from the task force regarding the 1-inch standard. If you recall, the 1-inch standard was a water quality standard. It's been used by a number of areas in the county, including Tyson's, Lincolnia, Bailey's Crossroads. However, there was a concern about space and the ability really to help the flooding problem that seemed to be identified as the most significant issue in this particular area. So staff had some discussions about, well, what might help? And in this case, we thought focusing more on the quantity versus the quality would be appropriate. And so in that case, the quality reference that's in this new guidelines would just say that all sites need to meet the current standards for the quality, recognizing that that could mean off-site, in particular circumstances, credits in accordance with Chapter 124 of the County Code. The quantity controls, however, we looked at that, and what we're trying to do is two things. One, we're trying to get some infrastructure for those areas that are currently underserved and help to try to correct some of those flooding issues. And recognizing that the area already has a fairly high level of impervious cover, we wanted to make sure that something was done in accordance with the regulations. It may not have gone very far trying to figure out the difference between the existing condition and then the redeveloped condition might actually be less impervious cover, which means that trying to solve that flooding issue, there would have been minimal requirements, and the flooding would have remained a fairly significant issue for years to come. And so with that, some language was crafted to talk about reductions comparing the existing conditions to that 10-year, 24-hour storm, and using the 1 acre standard. If you're 1 acre or less, basically are smaller. You wouldn't have quite as much flexibility, although that still could be a sizable location. You would be called for a 25% reduction in both the total volume of runoff released and also the flow rate. And for areas that are 1 acre or larger, we propose a 40% less than the existing peak runoff rate and the volume controlled. So again, we're comparing the existing to trying to reduce it from that existing condition. The phosphorus, again, the quality would have to meet the most current regulatory standards. And then, however, we did recognize that there may be a situation where there may be some small wooded sites that haven't previously been developed, or a corner of a lot that perhaps was developed at one time and no longer. But we didn't want to hurt them in any way. So we said, if you're a good forested condition, some outlot somewhere, just meet the current regulatory requirements. And then, as always, there's a caveat in there, because this is a policy document. If these goals are demonstrated to not be fully achievable, then we would like to see, from a policy perspective, all available measures implemented to the extent practicable in order to support these goals. So with that, I think it sets a standard for trying to solve the problem that has been identified as the most significant in the McLean area, i.e. the flooding issue. And then two, to allow some flexibility going forward, recognizing that there may be some give and take once the calculations are done. But yet, looking at the facilities that are most likely and the reasonableness of doing this on particular sites, we felt that this was a good way to address that issue. And that is now, at that point, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that time, the time you put in and working with us on this language. Obviously, we had some concerns about asking too much, and we had concerns about not asking enough. And I think you figured out how to thread that needle. So questions from the task force members, please. Comments.
I just had a question for Joe. From, I know when we had sort of the subcommittee on the stormwater had a chance to talk with some folks from the county who were super helpful in kind of giving us some examples and talking through. One of the things I was kind of learning about was the difference between retention and detention, and one of those was sort of about slowing the rate that the water sort of left your site as a way to kind of minimize overwhelming the stormwater structure, basically to get it out. And Joe can probably explain it better. And then the other one was detention, which was actually about holding the water on the site. And I think when they had shown us examples of what could be done they picked some sites in McLean to use as examples. They had shown some examples that were about the rate of flow, sort of like the retention, but not so much about just the full on holding the water on the site. So I was just wondering sort of where, sort of what their thoughts were on that, as far as did they have some sort of examples of, because I think if I'm reading this correctly, and please let me know if I'm not reading correctly, when it talks about the 25% of total volume, that's about literally that water never leaves the site, versus 25% of the rate of flow is it just slows down the speed that it leaves the site. So it's just a question, if you could go through that in a little more detail, please.
Sure. Well, in terms of water quantity, there's actually 4 areas that the county code addresses, and both the volume and the flow rate are part of that water quantity control. So the 4 items that the code looks to address are the channel protection, which is the downstream areas, the flood protection, then there's also existing buildings, which is also kind of a flood protection measure, and then detention. So detention is not holding it permanently. And so I guess that's the big takeaway for the water quantity, is that it's not intended to be a permanent impoundment. That's where the water quality would come in. When you talk about retention, you're talking about the water quality. So the intent is to capture it. Now, when you're talking water quality, it's a far, far smaller volume of water that would be retained on site, and the phosphorus would be removed. So in terms of water quantity, there's actually the two components are pretty important, both that volume that would be held for, again, the regulations talk about the 10-year, 24-hour storm. That's a particular table that's in the county code in chapter 124, but then the flow rate. So it does allow you to release it, but it's at a particular flow rate. So it is not actually retaining it for any great length of time. It would be detaining it until it can be, so it can be released at a reasonable flow rate. Because otherwise you get a very high volume of water coming down the stream very quickly or to the stream, which could lead to kind of the fire hose effect, where you get a lot of scouring and you get a lot of suspended solids then in the streams. So it is a stream protection measure to make sure that you've got a channel in between here and the receiving stream that can handle it, but also you don't want to blow out your stream when it gets down close to it ultimately. So really it's two parts of quantity, both the volume control. It doesn't say you have to keep it on site. That would be a quality, and those levels are far less. But this would be the volume being released at a reasonable rate.
Okay, that makes some sense. So sorry, I read those as sort of two different things with the volume and the runoff rate, but it sounds like it's really kind of the same thing. Really, is there's a certain amount of the volume of water that's landing on the site that you're aiming to sort of control and release more slowly, and that's either
Yes.
that 25% or that 40%.
Yeah, and it would compare it, in this case, it would compare it to the existing conditions.
Okay.
Recognizing that that's your comparison. What do you have now coming off? And let's control that and try to lower that amount.
Okay. And is this similar to just what's been done at some other areas in Fairfax County? I know you talked, it was a little bit different, but this is sort of some newer language. But are there any other locations that have done something similar?
Yes, I'm trying to refresh my own memory here. There is. Yes, the short answer is yes. We do have some of this language, but this one would be unique. However, there is one other activity center that did speak to this issue of 24-hour, 10-year, 24-hour storm, but yet it didn't. It assumed that it was looking again at the increase in impervious cover. In this particular case, we're looking at the existing conditions. So yeah, in that case, actually, it was the Reston. The Reston policies, it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison, but they do talk about FARs of 1.0 and greater, and then for sites with greater than 50% impervious cover, and for sites less than or equal to 50% impervious cover. So they're using the same sort of rule, but then they get into the 2-year 24-hour storm instead of the 10-year, and so again, that gets probably closer to the channel protection. So I think in Reston, the focus was on channel protection, one of those 4 parameters that are under the quantity controls for the county. And here we're looking at a little bit more of the detention and the flood protection. And that's why that particular storm was, that particular 10-year, 24-hour storm was picked. And if that sounds confusing, that's probably because it is. There's a lot of moving parts, and it really depends on what you're trying to hit. Reston had some pretty significant issues with channel protection, and they had their own flooding issues that we were trying to address. So that's probably the one that's the closest and the most similar. But because of the issues here, that's why we went for more of a quantity focus. Most of them, like I said, Lincolnia, Tyson's, Bailey's, they went for the 1-inch standard. So that was a little bit more of a quality standard. But here we turned it a little bit.
Tim, quick question, or I guess this will probably go back to you, Joe. On page 2, where it starts talking about if on a given site stormwater quantity and quality goals are demonstrated not to be fully achievable, what do we mean by that? Because I mean, when not in the long distant past, built a house and anything was achievable with the right amount of funds. And I don't think that's the intent there. I don't think we want the landowners to have to continually throw money at a problem. I don't think that's the intent of this, but I don't want somebody to be held to, hey, you can build a vault to hold X gallons of water, and it's just financially not in the realm of the doable. Does that make sense?
Right. This is indeed looking for partial solutions occasionally. So we do go back and forth during the rezoning process with our applicants. It's not unusual to have a discussion with the engineers, the stormwater engineers, and we are asking that a particular policy be met. That's the expectation. And we do occasionally get into circumstances where they say, I'm sorry, but that to do that would mean, and then there's a litany of different steps that may have to be taken. For example, retrofitting an existing pond, but then you get into issues of losing the volume and the outfall structures and whether the embankments are engineered for a certain thing. So there's always the possibility of getting into a bit more of a negotiation, so that if indeed some of that can be met on site, we would certainly like to see it, but it's hard to predict what sort of strange situations you may be in when you get into development and consolidated properties or not consolidated. Usually each application is unique in terms of its setup. So we, again, and that's really language that we've used previously, but it does lead to some discussions, generally speaking, during the rezoning phase with the stormwater engineers, and we would ask them, okay, what can you do? What's reasonable without breaking the bank? And they've come back, and we've gone back and forth a little bit, and usually we come to a pretty amicable solution in terms of that.
All right, Rich, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I had a question. What triggers the requirement to comply with this? Is there something in the zoning code or the stormwater management ordinance that would determine a minimum? You know, if someone's just doing a little project, I'm assuming we're not going to ask them to do a whole redo of their stormwater management. So can you tell me what the reference triggers are for this?
The trigger with this would be a legislative application, so a rezoning or a special exception that would come in. So anything that would have a legislative review where the policies would be applied and the package would be sent out to various agencies for comment, for review and comment. And again, it is a discretionary decision. Each of those situations I mentioned, the special exception or the rezoning, before public hearings would be had before the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors. So those would be the situations where it would be applicable, and that's where the policies would be evaluated, and the application would be compared to those policies, how they are meeting those particular policies.
You're on mute again.
You're muted, Rich.
Are you saying then that if I wanted to buy a building and change its use and not do any exterior improvements to the building, I would have uncertainty about whether I'd be forced to do a whole raft of stormwater management work?
We've had those situations before. Generally speaking, if there are no changes to the interior, we absolutely had applicants who don't change that. The reviewers, the staff agencies would be looking at that. Land Development Services, our Site Development and Inspections Division would look at that. Oftentimes, if somebody is grandfathered, and there are various technical memos that LDS has issued to the various for the various situations, as you mentioned here. Those carry a lot of weight in terms of the policy. So it does become a question of what's reasonable. But obviously, when we look at it, and there are technical memos done by LDS for what we would, as a county, ask the applicants to pursue. That's something that usually rules the day in that particular situation in terms of the staff. technically though, yes, you're correct. If you do open it up for a legislative application, the board may say, I want you to do this. But in general, the policies, in this particular case, you're not changing anything on the outside. So it would be, we would, as staff, would not be looking for significant things. Now, granted, if the exterior has something that is clearly deficient and causing some problems for your neighbors, maybe even causing problems for yourself, we're going to look at that and we're going to ask you to do something about it. But if it's a use that doesn't, again, the legislative application, you would technically open it up for that, but the LDS technical memos would probably give us some very strong guidance about which way staff should go with that. You're on mute again, Rich.
I guess I just want to be on the record as saying that I think it's important to provide a level of certainty for people going into a process, not to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars on zoning attorneys and civil engineers, and just to determine whether reuse of a building is possible. And that I would encourage some sort of language in here that would limit triggering this requirement except for new construction or major exterior improvement work. Just my opinion.
All right, do we have other questions or comments for Joe? I don't know, Jack, if you have anything to add here, given that you were kind enough to get this going.
And then I missed one of the meetings. I just kind of reiterate for Richard, what Richard said. I think that Joe and the team have put together something that reflects primary concerns of McLean, which is flooding. And so in that way, while we're doing a different customization than Reston or one of the other ones, it's reflective of the kind of customization that is appropriate to McLean. I think it would be relatively simple for a comp plan to say that all things being equal, we would request the county be lenient or have it not apply for a legislative action that does not entail exterior work.
All right, Rob, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I've got two questions. One is how is the base measured? I can't believe that the county or the landowners have any measurements for what their flow is for this type of storm. I understand the standard, but how do you know what you reduce 40% from or 25%? That's my first question.
Yeah, David, can you increase that a little bit so I can see that language again? Yes, basically there are some assumptions. Again, when you talk about a particular storm, that table is defined in Chapter 124 of the County Code. And so it does make some assumptions about how much rainfall is coming from the sky. And at that point, for that particular defined storm, and so when you have a particular level of impervious cover, and again, it's very clear. You have rooftops and sidewalks and parking lots and such. So that becomes your impervious cover. So it's really, it's a calculation. The volume is fairly simple to determine within that 24-hour period. You have so many inches. You know what the storm is supposed to be, you know what the volume is, and you multiply it by 0.25 or 0.4, and that gives you a value. So in that particular case, it's not guessing what's going to happen in the future. It's basically a defined value that's in the county code, and that's what you use. It's a set number. Yeah, you're on mute again, Rob.
Rob, you need to unmute.
Okay, just to follow up to that, if they got two landowners, one has 40% impervious and the next one has 60%, the landowner, the first landowner's burden, whether it's less than an acre or more than an acre, is going to be less than the second landowner. Is that correct?
Oh, in terms of the amount of runoff generated, yes. If you have a higher, yes, if you have a higher level of impervious cover on site, your reduction would be greater because it's a percentage. Your percentage would be the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, my second question is, how does we've sort of grown up, at least since those of us who worked on Tyson's, with the 1 inch standard. How does these standards relate to the 1 inch? I mean, that's a pretty common question I think people are going to ask. So how do they relate?
I guess the short answer is they're doing two different things. So they don't relate very well. So they're doing two different things. So the retention policies and requirements are separate in the code from the quantity requirements. So that 1 inch calculation gets into different calculations in different section of the code, of the stormwater management code. So really they don't relate. They're doing two different things. They're using numbers for two separate sets of numbers for two separate different things. Now, having said that, I will say that if you are doing some retention on site, you're grabbing a little bit of that water. So you get credit for the volume that you're retaining on site and treating for phosphorus. So you get a little credit volume wise, but really, they don't compare. They're two different things you're dealing with, two separate sets of figures.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought, but I wanted it confirmed. Thanks.
It sounds like it depends on what you're solving for. And as you were saying, Joe, I think in what we're solving for in McLean, downtown McLean, a lot of it is flooding. I have that right.
Right. That was the issue that we were trying to solve. And I know the DPWES folks in stormwater planning, they have looked at that. And they were pulling up some maps of the various complaints and incidents that they've had. And it's pretty extensive, both within the CBC and outside of it. So that seemed to be the issue that really needed to be addressed most seriously.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. Any other questions for Joe?
Just to follow up on with that, what are some examples of sort of solutions that someone could use on their property to meet some of these criteria, to meet this sort of reduction in the volume? Sort of I know you guys have shown us some stuff before on some slides, but this seems like it's changed a little bit. So what type of thing would you do to meet that 25% or 40% reduction?
Yeah, probably the most likely would be the underground vaults. So you see think about the Arch of St. Louis. You're basically taking that sort of structure, that sort of shape, that ellipse, and you're putting that vault underground. And so really it's the size of the vault, whether it's under a parking lot, or even under a parking garage, a possibility of doing that. There are some other manufactured sort of things, but again, they're mostly for the water quality type things that people do. It's really hard for more of an urban, and I can go to the DPW folks to see what they've seen lately, but previously we used ponds and such. Wet ponds, they obviously have a lot of capacity, and they have some habitat value as well, but we don't have the space for that in a CBC type environment. So really the realistic solution in this particular case are the underground vaults. And I would have to talk with the DPWES stormwater planning folks to see what other kind of solutions they've seen these days. But that's the one that comes to mind, other than a pond of some sort, which obviously wouldn't work for this area.
All right, thank you. Other comments, questions? All right, thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate your work on this issue and the language you've provided us. So thank you very much. And thank you also to the group of task force members who were working on this with Joe. So thank you for your involvement on this. With that, I think I'll turn it over to staff and maybe let them explain summarize, I should say, what we heard at our public meeting on Saturday, and then anything that they heard during the lunch today as well. And then after that, we'll go on to process for the rest of task force and then next steps here. So Jen, is that going to be you?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So first, I want to thank all the task force members who attended the Saturday open house. It was a really successful event. We had about 200 folks tune in to the meeting. So that was really just a terrific turnout. So thank you all for getting the word out, and especially the supervisor's office for getting notices and the next door posting and everything. So I don't want to rehash too much. I know a lot of you were there, but I'll kind of highlight a few of the key things. So Supervisor Faust did provide some great opening remarks. He thanked the task force very much for the 2+ years of work and time and effort that has gone into this process. He did a nice job of reminding everybody why we're here, why we're gathered, to talk about the future of McLean, to talk about having a more vibrant and active downtown, the idea of a civic space that came forward during the visioning process. He also noted the idea of, this is the plan, and future rezoning efforts are going to be how this plan is implemented, in that the community, of course, is very much part of that process of reviewing applications. So I think that was a nice point that he made in his remarks. And then Kim followed the supervisor with some really wonderful remarks as well about the work that was done, that's been ongoing, working with staff and the community on, again, this vision for revitalization in the CBC. Staff then gave a presentation about the plan guidance. Leanna provided a majority of those remarks, and then we had DOT staff, and we also had a presentation on streetscapes. And then after the staff presentation, Rob, Winnie, and Rich also took the time to say a few words about the recommendations and their thoughts on the task force process. Then we got into question and answer. We had over 100 questions that were typed into the Q&A panel. We obviously didn't get to all of those. We also had a number of questions through the verbal comments. So Tim Cutts did a really wonderful job of kind of going between those questions on the phone as well as the typed questions and trying to hit kind of the major categories of questions that we heard. There weren't, I would say, we didn't hear anything too new or surprising, and I'm curious if task force members, if you think differently or kind of have impressions of the questions that we've got that were raised. Kind of the main categories were about building height. How's the plan ensuring that there are transitions to the communities? How are we making sure this is not going to be another sort of Tyson's looking development in the center? There are some questions about community benefits and how this additional opportunities for residential will benefit the CBC. A number of questions about community character, and also a good deal of questions about the environmental policy. How are we addressing sustainability? That might actually be something that hasn't been touched on too much with this group. Schools, we did have school staff there to talk about the concerns about the school capacity, especially at McLean High School, and how FCPS monitors school capacity and future mitigation. A few questions about the park space and how the comp plan recommendation for the signature park differs from, I think the example was the P district zoning ordinance regulations, and how that is how open space is not necessarily park space. So that's one of the differences between the zoning ordinance regulations and what's in the plan, which is for this focused park space.
So if I can just stop you there, I guess I'd be curious from the task force members who did participate, anything you thought was new or interesting? I guess, yeah, I share the staff view that these are concerns that have been raised with them, shared with us. And I think we're trying to address many of those issues. A lot of them are really, I think, sort of a nuance or a fine tuning of the language that we've looked at versus anything that requires a wholesale change in what we've been talking about. So I'd be curious if others had different impressions. So again, open the floor to anybody who wants to share their impressions or thoughts about the public meeting. And Rich, is that your hand or is that your hand from previous?
It was my hand from previous, but I was going to raise it again.
Okay.
I think these sorts of things are so incredibly complicated.
Right.
I don't know how anybody who isn't, either a professional who understands how these things work or has been following everything incredibly closely can really grasp all the details that go into it. So, I think there were a lot of misconceptions because there's a lot of stuff to digest. Hopefully, people will get a better grip on what's really in the plan and there won't be so much misinformation out there.
Well, and just thinking about that because, and there's, we heard too a lot of fear. Fear that we're going to have too much density, that we're going to have too little parking, that we're going to have too tall a building. And, they're all reasonable fears, but it's not, those aren't issues that we ourselves are that fearful of because we think we have a pretty good plan and we know it's in the plan. So, in terms of how we simplify the language, now I'm not talking about the comp plan, but I think in terms of how we might summarize that going forward in a way that's more easily digestible for the public, in terms of things like parking and height and density, and again, issues that have been coming up. So it's just something to think about. Rich, you're on.
Got it, me, if that's okay. Richard.
So, Rich, you were going to say something else?
Height is a good example. You hear a lot of comments, you hear people make it sound like the comp plan is going to result in Midtown Manhattan. But there's basically only one project that's going to be allowed that can be 10 stories tall. And everything else is 7, which is pretty much consistent with what has been being built the last 10 years anyway. But people get all wound up because they don't understand what's in the plan, and it's kind of unfortunate. And there are a lot of people, frankly, who are leaders and who are active participants in our community organizations who don't seem to know what's in the plan, but they don't mind speaking up about things without having knowledge of what the details are. And so I think county staff does need to maybe be more proactive in reaching out to some of these groups, because I don't know of any other way to get them educated. It's unfortunate.
Kim, this is Derek. I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I don't know if there's a mechanism to do that, and I just haven't figured it out. Yeah, kind of two things jumped out at me. The first was, there were some comments about people, particularly near Franklin Sherman and Solona Village. They really didn't want really tall buildings. It was fine to put tall buildings in the center zone, but they really didn't want to see anything over 3 stories or even 2 stories, next to the elementary school and next to the Solona Village residential area. So I'm glad that we kind of held the line on that a little bit. that we didn't, move those borders over. And then I think a lot of the comments specifically surrounded schools. So if you're going to put that many thousands of residential units, how does that affect schools? So those are really the two things that jumped out at me. That I'm glad that we did do a good job of tapering off from the center zone.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Thanks. And two, I think the school issue, again, is one that we need to pay attention to, but it's not like we're going to have 2,000, new apartments or condos going up where we're going to have a lot of elementary school kids in them tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now. So we will have time to be able to plan and see what the impact would be on schools and to plan accordingly. But again, the fears that people have had. So, just to make sure that we hear what those fears are so that we can address them head on. Other comments and Winnie.
I want to reiterate pretty much what Rich was saying about making it clear, because I've met with these people several times. David has actually helped me do a little chart so I could show them what the heights were. I don't think we're being clear enough in our education process or in our talking about it, because I think the height is a way bigger issue actually than the density, at least listening to people. So I think I'm not particularly going to get upset one way or the other on what these heights are, but I do think that we should be pretty clear about what they are. I understand if we say maximum is going to be 175 feet, you're going to get a whole crowd of people that say that it should be 170 feet. But I think we have to be upfront about it. And I think that Rich's point that it's only one building is pretty important, or some important point to make. And I'm not sure I've even been clear enough when I'm talking to him sometimes about this. So I'd like the staff to help here, to be honest with you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Rob, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, and I've been getting an eye full of emails and stuff. There are a lot of people who believe that the job of the task force was to solve to the community vision. I've been trying to tell people it's an input, it's a starting place, but I think the county needs to do a whole lot more education as to what is the process, and that, this is one input to the process, and it's an important input. But again, otherwise, why would you have a task force? I mean, we've wasted 2.5 years by trying to do some creative work and compromise and reach consensus and agree to disagree on some things. But I really think the county needs to explain to people that the community vision is not what's going to happen. I mean, we're dealing with other people's property. We're dealing with a bunch of other complicated factors. I think that's something that needs to be addressed, and probably still right now, it would be helpful if the supervisor's office could put something out on that to really explain to people that, this is more complicated than just the community meetings we had in 2018.
Right. Thank you. Jack, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just real briefly, I think it's three pieces, right? Where this all fits into the process, but also just the high level, what are the goals of the plans, not just what people tend to focus on. In other words, when this started out, many months ago, I'll just go there, when we had Street Sense do a reflection and a summary after that first meeting, they had a pretty good summary of, we want to have a market realistically balanced measure of uses that are reasonable to expect that the McLean market could absorb in pursuit of these public good, which was a public gathering space, enhanced streetscape, a gathering green, a mix of uses that represent what the McLean community wants in terms of alternative housing styles. Reiterate what the benefits are, and that the market-based benefit of getting that means that we have limited tools, and one of them is density in a very measured way with good transitions. I think there was a lot of good language in the street sense reiteration back that could be putting out front what the benefits that we're trying to achieve with this density. It's not just because we think we like tall buildings better. So.
Right. Thank you. Other thoughts and observations, comments? One of the challenges we have, of course, is how to get the word out to the public in a better fashion. And we've talked about this, gosh, for the 2.5 years that we've been working on this. Because there are only really a handful of individuals outside of this group who have been following the process, and some HOAs and some individual property owners, but we are so limited in how we can actually get out there and educate. So we could say to the staff, well, we ought to educate better, but it's a difficult thing to do. And of course, when we can't do a public meeting where we're going to be able to have individuals walk around and like we did at the opening public hearings with Street Sense, that without that ability, we know we're limited in trying to attract people to sit in a room somewhere and watch and participate that way. So again, if you have any great ideas on how to get information out, certainly the supervisor's office does that, and sending information out with his regular email newsletter. But it is something, it is a challenge, and it's a very significant challenge for our community just to keep folks educated. So I appreciate your thoughts on that as well. Any other thoughts and comments? If not, I think I'll turn it to Paul.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if Jim would be so kind as to send around the list of 100 submitted questions so that we all would have a better idea as to the breadth and range of concern that might be being expressed in the community. Thank you.
Yeah, we actually had talked about that with Kim, whether we send it out to everybody. I should have mentioned that we are working on the responses to the unanswered questions, so the ones that we didn't get to verbally at the meeting, and that's going to be documented, and we'll certainly get that out. We'll get that out to you all, and that'll be posted too as well.
Hi. I'd like to respond to Kim.
Sure, Jim.
It looks to me like this COVID thing is likely to be dying down within the next 6 months. Maybe we ought to think about trying to go for a couple of big open public meetings sometime this summer or this coming summer, in order to get the word out and get people walking around with poster boards, etc. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think that we probably ought to put out a series of press releases. Thus far, what I've read in the local press is concentrated on the effects, not the benefits, i.e., oh my God, we're going to put in big buildings, but nobody mentions why. And that word is not getting out to the public. So I think probably some press releases put out either by this committee or by the supervisor's office. I'd recommend this committee put them out, because people look at supervisor's office from a political point of view. Hopefully, they look at us as citizens. So that's two suggestions I would make. But I really think that our public meetings should be open to the public to walk around and have touchy-feely as opposed to sit in front of the screen. And we ought to be considering the fact that COVID is likely to be going away sometime in the relatively near future, and be planning to have open public meetings when that happens.
Well, I'll jump in on the first one here in terms of timing. There are, I hope, some potential proposals out there for work in the CBC that would want to get started as soon as we have a document through the Board of Supervisors. And I think also in terms of the tax credits that the county has just adopted to encourage development in revitalization zones is something also that's on a timely basis. It's best for us to act as a task force and to get that moving through. So I understand your point, Jim. I do wish there was a way to do it that we wouldn't have to wait until COVID passed, because while I'm hopeful that in 6 months' time, many of us have been vaccinated, I'm not sure we'll be at a point where they're doing large gatherings at that point in time. So I think in terms of timing, we do need to sort of stick to the timetable that we've modified throughout the COVID period. So I think that would be something, and for us to, again, think about ways in which we can get information out there. So there are a number of us working on sort of this new McLean Today website that may be operational by early next year. That would be a good place to promote at least some information that would be available to general citizens. But again, that's not ready to be unveiled, and content is not there yet. So I don't know if staff wants to address any of Jim's ideas. And
yeah, I think I don't know in terms of county, the county having in-person meetings. I don't know when that might be able to happen. We did offer, to try to help with that issue. The session that we held today, we offered a session for an hour, sort of as a follow-up to the community meeting. Because we are missing that piece where someone might stay at the end of a meeting and ask questions of staff or task force members. So I think we had about 15 or so participants today, just with follow-up questions from the Saturday meeting. So trying to be creative about those opportunities, and so I think that was successful. I mean, we had some participants and who had attended on that Saturday to follow up, but it's just such an unknown in terms of when we might have in-person meetings again. So I'm hesitant to commit to something like that without knowing kind of where we're headed. And I know we're sort of immediately headed in the opposite direction, I think, with the governor's recent orders. So,
right.
So I think we're open to suggestions, and putting together responses to the questions that we didn't get to that we'll share and post, and trying to kind of do our best to answer questions that we do get. And I would like to reiterate just and thank the task force for getting the word out about our meeting that Saturday. There were press releases for that as well, and a host of online and social media updates, and we sent a postcard out to all the property owners in the CBC, and then a small buffer around, and 200 folks virtually on a Saturday morning, I think is we were happy with that, and so I hope others were too, to have that level of participation virtually. I think speaks to the interest in your community, which I think is great.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other thoughts on the Saturday session or today's Q&A as well at lunch hour? If not, then I don't know if Leanna, you or Jen will be sort of summarizing our next steps process. As I mentioned in my email, I do hope and plan that our December 14 meeting will be our last final meeting. You know, and I know we're going to miss being together on a regular basis. Maybe we could just, you know, have lunch dates or something once COVID clears up. So with that, I guess to emphasize what the staff has been telling us, that the comp plan is eventually going to be, well, we're going to finish in December. The staff, well, I'm going to stop. I'm going to just turn it over to you, Jen or Leanna, whoever is going to walk through the process from here on in before I continue to fumble away.
I can start. Leanna can jump in if I'm missing anything. So some of the things that we're looking to do is there are a couple of text, I'll say, cleanups that we need to address still. And so one of those is the land unit G1 that we've been working. David and I have been working with Jim on. There are a couple of text considerations that we want to look at in response to some HOA comments that we received. And internally too, we also have been identifying a few things that we think we just may want to look at again for clarity's sake. And so we would want to get any of those language updates to you prior to that December meeting, of course, so you all can look at that version. And again, I think there'll be relatively minor changes or modifications that we're making. And then we'll highlight what those are. And so it's easier to identify as you're looking through the document. From there, we're going to be working on a staff report and getting that information together in preparation for public hearings, of course. And then we'll also talk through, given all the feedback that you've all provided tonight about the education piece of it, we'll look at whether we need to consider other types of meetings with individual groups, but that's something that we'll talk about as staff, what our capacity is for that and what makes sense to do that in preparation for hearings. So that's really, I think, the highlights. I don't know if Leanna or anyone else wants to add kind of what we're going to be working on.
No, I think that captures it. So we would provide an example. I know, we've had some discussion back and forth about clarifying the section that we have, the discouraged uses section. I know we've gotten some feedback from task force members and the letter that came in from some of the HOAs. So there's some minor things that we wanted to look at. And again, we provide those to you and kind of highlight those before the December meeting. Putting the stormwater language in there just so that you've got kind of a final product for your last meeting. And then we'd move forward, as Jen said, with the staff report and public hearings and continue to take comments from the public as well.
All right, so what we anticipate happening is our meeting will be scheduled on the 14th. So I'll send an appointment around for everyone. And then Jen will follow up with the information for the dial-in. We anticipate then the Tuesday or Wednesday before, so the 8th or 9th of December, we'll have the sort of final text for us with all the modifications that they've been talking about. So they're going to add the stormwater language. They're going to do some fine tuning of the various issues that have been raised by these other organizations. And we are not going to do a line by line. We are not going to do much of anything unless it pops up at you that you think is contrary to consensus of the group, which is to say, if you think the language maybe doesn't identify an issue, or if it's just simply you found a typo, just, ping the staff and tell them there's a typo. Or if you want clarification because you're not clear about something or intent, again, ping staff. It really just, we'll save that meeting on the 14th for sort of final major issues. And from there, I think, that again will be our final meeting. After that document is finished, staff does its document, that's sent on to the County Planning Commission. Again, for the outside groups and individuals who are listening into this call, that's an opportunity for them to weigh in, both individually and as a group, to share their thoughts and comments on both the staff draft and the comprehensive plan. And then again, once the Planning Commission reports it on further to the Board of Supervisors, there's another opportunity as well. So there are plenty of opportunities for individuals and organizations to weigh in. This is the first stop is the task force comp plan proposal, and then it will go on at that point in time. So any questions about process, timing, anything else from task force members?
Kim, you just referred to the task force comp plan. And earlier you said if there's some areas where the consensus of the group hasn't been reflected in the text, that we should change that. Can I send you some stuff again about where the text doesn't align with what this group has decided, so that we can be sure if that product is going forward under the aegis of the task force that it represents our opinions?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and send it to Jen and David and myself, and
maybe everyone, so that it's not just Paul's opinion. Love Paul, but just want to check.
Yeah, of course. But I think ultimately that will happen. I just want to first start off and look at it and see whether or not, we would share what Paul would share, but it's whether or not we would agree with his assessment and whether or not we think we've resolved it, and maybe he disagrees with the outcome, which could be an interpretation issue.
That is absolutely not the case, Kim, but thank you. And thank you, Jack.
No. I'm not
glad you're somebody sticking up for you vis-a-vis the staff.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm just saying if that was an issue, then it would be an interpretation issue. Since I haven't seen what you've sent, I'm not commenting on anything you're potentially sending me. But yeah, so take a look at what that document has come out with, what we see on the 8th or 9th, and use that as the basis, if you would. So we're all set to act on the 14th. Other comments, thoughts? All right, and Tim, I'll let you open it up to questions from the public then.
Sure, and just a reminder, I think we probably have the same folks on from last time, but if you're dialed in, just hit *3 and raise your hand if you're on the phone. I'll call on you. All right, looks like we have a call on user number 4 with a question.
Kim?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, hi.
Yes?
Tim, this is April Georgeless. I don't even know where to start tonight. Guys, I don't know if you realize this or not, but this has been advertised and brought up by Street Sense and Supervisor Faust as a community-driven project, the CBC redesign. When Supervisor Faust sends out his notices, it's community-driven. Street Sense, it was community driven. We need your input. If you don't like it, we'll listen to you, and that's going to be it. Ben even told an MPC meeting that the community can shut this down if they don't like it. The community doesn't know about it. 200 people Saturday, November 4th. That's lovely, or 7th. That was lovely. And all the questions are lovely. And for someone to say that the neighborhood leaders don't even know what they're talking about, who are participating, that's not lovely. That means they need to understand what you are doing and proposing. And then to hear, Kim, I'm sorry, but you hope there are potentially, builders waiting in the wings to come and build. That's lovely. Except the community deserves to know what is waiting in the wings and what might happen. I was at the little lunch meeting today, and I felt it was just a runaround, evasive buffet of non-answers, except stormwater. That was the same as we heard tonight, which was very good. The rest of it was just inadequate. I brought up the visual impact assessment and elevations that must be done for the border views from the homes and the school. And I addressed the Langley Center, which is across from Franklin Sherman. And boy, I had to wait 3 times, was it, Tim, in order to get the question even kind of understood? That's not how you deal with the community. The community around Franklin Sherman, for example, and the entire border, when the density variation was brought up, that was dismissed too and confused, like, oh, we don't know what you're talking about. The Langley Center was granted an exemption consideration, and I guess a nomination for the Planning Commission, whatever, to be 7 stories and a center area. Stories. Renderings and VIAs of that must be done for the community so they know the max that's being proposed. For the entire CBC, you're proposing different maximums now. And I'm not anti-development, but I certainly want to be informed. And if there are community leaders that don't understand, then you know the community doesn't know. To have 200 Saturday was wonderful, but that's not 60,000 people. They have no idea what you're doing, guys. You need to back up and pause. I know the builders have been chomping to do things, and I can appreciate that. But that doesn't mean you can bypass the community, and that's what you're doing. You're insulting and bypassing the community and all the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods' requests have been ignored, dismissed, evasively pursued. I know I don't have a lot of answers to my questions, and the VIA is the minimum you guys should be doing, and the elevations. And the county should be notifying everyone. I do applaud Jim's idea that at least had a sense of community outreach and concern. And I know you guys are tired. You've worked a long, hard time, but you've done it without the community. This is not street sense. We were misled. Street sense is what we were told would be followed, and sustainable. I brought up the word sustainable, and we now have a sustainability engineer who wants to work with the county and work with you. When is he going to work with you? Saturday? For 2 minutes? I think this is atrocious, and I'm going on record on behalf of the community that does not know, and the community, the few of us that do know. Shame on you guys. I mean, I know you've worked hard, and I do applaud a lot of your ideas and inputs, but the community cannot be left out. This is appalling. Thank you.
All right, thanks, April. The meetings have been public, have been advertised every single month. So we've tried as many ways as possible to educate and inform. It's just unfortunate because we don't have a radio. We don't have many publications that all of McLean reads that covers our local stuff. So we're limited. But thank you for your comments. Okay, Tim, anybody else?
Nope, I don't see anybody else with their hands. That's it.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in again today. Look for the doc that will come out, like I say, on the 8th or 9th. Please take a look at that. Paul, look forward to your comments. I didn't mean to brush you off there. If there are things that you need to bring to the attention of the task force, by all means, share that, and we'll bring it up at our meeting on the 14th. Otherwise, I think have a wonderful, happy Thanksgiving in a very small setting with just a very few handful of people. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.